This one is going to be a bit of a world shatterer. Wouldn't it be a cruel and tragic twist if the one witch whose love was powerful enough to defeat Voldemort was herself the victim of a love potion? And that the purest act of love in the entire wizarding world came from someone who never truly understood her love for her own husband. What if beneath the surface of their famous love story, there lurked something much more sinister? What if James, desperate to win over the witch who repeatedly rejected him, resorted to the most drastic and, frankly, pathetic of measures? Join me today as we unpeel the difficult reality surrounding one of the wizarding world's most well-known love stories, as well as the far-reaching implications it may have caused. Don't worry, I'll cover arguments for and against. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. In case it wasn't clear enough by the title or intro segment, what I'm accusing James of is this: he drugged Lily. And if what I'm accusing James of is true, then it wouldn't just entirely validate the feelings of James haters. It would also mean that his vile actions caused massive ripple effects across the entire story. It wouldn't just mean that one of the most iconic couples in the wizarding world was founded on deception. It would also cast a long shadow over Harry's origins, including the very magic that protected him as a baby. If Lily's love for James was never real, if it was forced, manufactured, or manipulated, then the sacrifice that saved Harry wasn't the result of some perfect romantic bond. It was the result of Lily's independent, unshakable love for her child. And that, if anything, makes her sacrifice even more tragic, but also even more powerful. But before we get too far into the rest of it, why? Why would James Potter resort to such an unthinkable act? James's motivations. Despite the loving photographs of James and Lily in each other's arms, if you think their relationship was all sunshine and romance from the start, you'd be categorically mistaken. And the truth is that for years, James struggled to win over the affections of Lily. And despite his own perceived charm and popularity, most of his attempts to win her over actually ended up pushing her further away. It also certainly didn't help that he was so overly preoccupied with bullying Lily's childhood friend, Severus Snape. The truth is that James was arrogant, impatient, and didn't play by the rules. But perhaps above all else, James was entitled. An only child to a wealthy family, James didn't hear no very often. And this is precisely the reason why I feel as though he may have resorted to such drastic actions. And when you consider the Snape element, this argument becomes even more compelling. Lily wasn't just the one thing James couldn't have. She was also the one thing Snape wanted. The rivalry between James and Snape ran deep, toxic, personal, and cruel. And when it came to Lily, the stakes were higher than ever. For James, winning Lily wasn't just about love. It was about winning, beating Snape, proving he could take away the one person Snape truly cared about and rubbing it in his face, no matter the cost. It wasn't just infatuation, it was competition. And in a world where potions can twist the will of another, James had access to exactly the kind of magic that could help him get what he wanted, even if it wasn't real. And honestly, this sounds like exactly the kind of pursuit you'd expect from an immature, arrogant, trust fund wizard like James Potter. When faced with a no for the first time in his life, paired with the desire to thwart a bitter enemy, it becomes clear, at least to me, that James had all the motivation he needed to resort to something like a love potion. I'll do my best to explore all of the reasons both for and against this theory. Now, let's take a look at the logistics. Love potions. While there is no one love potion in the wizarding world, perhaps the most commonly known is Amortentia. It's the most powerful love potion in the world, said Hermione. Quite right, you recognized it, I suppose, by its distinctive mother-of-pearl sheen. Amortentia works by producing a powerful infatuation or obsession in the drinker, and emits a scent unique to each individual, reflecting what they are most attracted to. However, one of the most important things to note here is that Amortentia doesn't produce genuine love. It only mimics it, a semblance of love that is derived from strong obsession. But even though these love potions aren't creating genuine love, they're certainly still able to do a lot of damage. Love is powerful, but so is obsession. It also happened to be a love potion that inadvertently led to the birth of Voldemort. His mother, Mary Gaunt, used one to enchant Tom Riddle Sr., luring him into a relationship he would have never chosen on his own. I think it's safe to say that they're not light-hearted pranks or silly spells. They're dangerous, dark magic disguised with a pretty label. But with all of this in mind, they do seem to be oddly available to just about anyone. After all, Fred and George sold them in their shop. Therefore, the likelihood that James Potter could have obtained a love potion, or even just brewed one, seems highly probable. Whether he used it or not is another question. Let's take a look at the facts. Lily's mind changed a little too quickly. It's an undeniable fact that Lily Evans despised James Potter throughout most of their time at Hogwarts. In Order of the Phoenix, we see firsthand, in Snape's worst memory, that she found him arrogant, cruel, and immature. Furthermore, she was completely disgusted by his constant bullying of Snape, calling out James even as Snape himself was losing points with her. But by the time they leave school, they're suddenly together, and the books only offer a hand-wave explanation. He matured. But what does that even mean? Where's the evidence of this change? We never see a clear turning point, no major moment when Lily's heart softens or when James makes a grand redeeming gesture. There's only the narrative jump. One moment she can't stand him, the next they're married. We're told James later grew up, matured, and somehow became worthy of Lily's love. But here's the brutal truth. James didn't have decades to grow. He died at 21. He had maybe 5 or 6 years to go from the entitled bully we see at Hogwarts to the man Lily supposedly fell in love with. Which poses another question altogether. Is that really enough time to meaningfully change the core of who someone is? I don't think that even in the wizarding world it's possible to erase deep-rooted character flaws in such a short time frame. Given the sheer damage James caused, the size of his ego, and the painfully short window he had to prove real change, why should we believe Lily suddenly fell for him out of genuine affection? Why should we accept the vague off-page claim that James matured when canon paints a clear picture of a boy who not only wielded his power to belittle others, but was also used to getting exactly what he wanted? If we tally up the repeated rejection, the juvenile rivalry with Snape, the wealth, the privilege, the entitlement complex, the lack of accountability, the obsessive behavior, the sudden and unexplained relationship shift, and of course the very existence of magical means to induce love, it starts to feel less like wild speculation and more like a deeply uncomfortable possibility. And all of these reasons are exactly why Lily choosing James feels so strange. Lily wasn't the kind of person easily impressed by charm, popularity, or status. She was intelligent, compassionate, and fiercely independent. Given her strong moral compass and sharp mind, it feels deeply inconsistent that she would suddenly fall for the very boy who spent years embodying the traits she most despised. The canon explanation. But before we push the love potion idea any further, let's take a look at canon, because it actually gives us a fairly straightforward explanation for why Lily chose James. According to J.K. Rowling, James did mature in his later Hogwarts years. We don't see most of it on page because the only extended look we get at him as a teenager is in Snape's worst memory, and that's a 15-year-old James at his worst. But Rowling has clarified outside the books that he deflated his head a bit, stopped hexing people for sport, and became less arrogant. Lily, for her part, refused to go out with him until he changed. We're also told she wouldn't tolerate his bullying and only began dating him in 7th year, after he'd matured. There's also the loyalty factor. James illegally became an animagus to support Remus Lupin during his transformations. Basically, he voluntarily underwent dangerous, complex magic purely to show support for a friend. He also showed what a good friend he could be when he took Sirius into his home after he ran away from his family. Meanwhile, Snape's trajectory sort of went in the opposite direction. In the Order of the Phoenix, Lily explicitly confronts Snape about his friends. Specifically, she points out that Mulciber used dark magic on another student, and that Snape simply brushed it off as a laugh. This is a critical moment because it shows that Lily was concerned about who Snape was becoming. Then comes the lake incident. When Snape calls Lily a mudblood, it isn't just a heated insult. It's the combination of years of ideological drift. Even after he apologizes, Lily tells him she's made excuses for him for too long. And by the time they leave Hogwarts, Snape is associating with future Death Eaters, and shortly after, he joins them outright. James, on the other hand, joins the Order of the Phoenix, actively fighting the ideology Snape is embracing. From Lily's perspective, this isn't just about personality, it's about values. She's a muggle-born witch watching one friend align himself with a supremacist movement and another actively oppose it. So the canon explanation is simple. James grew out of immaturity while Snape grew into extremism, and Lily chose the future that aligned with her identity and moral compass. Now, at first glance, the canon explanation does hold up under scrutiny, but it also relies heavily on information we're told rather than shown. Nearly everything regarding James's transformation comes secondhand, primarily through Sirius and Lupin, both of whom were his closest friends. Their testimony isn't necessarily false, but it is biased. We never actually see a scene where James directly atones to Lily, nor is there any documented moment where she witnesses that change and consciously reevaluates him. The only extended memory we're given of James at school is one in which he humiliates Snape publicly and attempts to pressure Lily into going out with him while Snape is hanging upside down. That's the last concrete on-page interaction we see between Lily and James before we're told they later dated. There's also the timeline to consider. James and Lily begin dating in 7th year. Within a few years of leaving Hogwarts, they are married and already deeply embedded in the First Wizarding War. James dies at 21. That means their entire romantic relationship, from first date to marriage to parenthood, occurs within an extremely narrow window of time. Of course, none of these arguments prove that a love potion was used, but it does mean the canon explanation doesn't eliminate the possibility. Power of love. Love is one of the most powerful but also enigmatic forms of magic in the wizarding world, and it was of course this very form of magic that allowed Lily to cast a loving sacrifice that ended Voldemort temporarily, and more importantly, saved baby Harry. But what makes this particular instance so striking is that while many mothers love their children immensely, none were able to do what Lily did. Plenty of people die during, before and after the books, but there doesn't seem to be any other instance of anyone doing what Lily did. I guess Harry did it, kind of, but to me it wasn't quite the same. So what was it about her love, above the love of all others, that was so potent? Here's what I think. It was powerful because her love for Harry was the only pure, untainted love in her life. If her relationship with James was indeed built on artificial, magically induced feelings, if she was drugged, manipulated, or coerced into that marriage through the use of a love potion, then her maternal love stands out as the one connection that was wholly hers, uncorrupted and real. And if this is the case, it makes her sacrifice even more extraordinary. She didn't die because of her manipulated attachment to James, or because of some romantic obligation. She died purely for her child, by her own will, acting on a love that no magic, no potion, no spell could manufacture or control. And in this light, Lily's act wasn't just powerful, it was redemptive, a final defiant expression of her own agency in a life where perhaps even her deepest personal relationships had been twisted by someone else's selfish ambition. Voldemort's story. If Harry was indeed born from a loveless union, then he wouldn't be the only one. As I mentioned earlier, Voldemort's mother, Merrippy Gaunt, famously used a love potion to enchant his father, Tom Riddle Sr., ultimately leading to Voldemort's birth. And what's worth mentioning here is that many believe that Voldemort's inability to understand or feel love, a defining aspect of his psychopathy, can be traced back to his completely unnatural conception. They believe that being born from a love potion, an artificial and manipulative force, left him incapable of forming genuine emotional connections, setting him on the path of darkness from the very beginning. And if you were to go by this information alone, you could easily refute the idea that James drugged Lily by pointing out that their son Harry did have the capacity to love. However, this is actually an incorrect assessment of Voldemort's emotional capabilities that has been propagated by the fandom. This whole notion has since been cleared up by J.K. Rowling in an interview. How much does the fact that Voldemort was conceived under a love potion have to do with his inability to understand love? Is it more symbolic? It was a symbolic way of showing that he came from a loveless union, but of course everything would have changed if Merrippy had survived and raised him herself and loved him. She said it herself. If Merrippy had survived and been there to raise him, then there's a very good chance that he could have loved. Therefore, love potions don't really have anything to do with it. There's also the whole chosen one thing. What is it about Harry that's so special? There are a lot of parallels between Voldemort and Harry, but if this theory turns out to be true, that James drugged Lily, then they even share the same origin, both born from loveless, manipulated unions. It would mean that at their core, Harry and Voldemort were shaped by the same dark beginnings, and perhaps this is why he was destined, above anyone else, to defeat Voldemort. Next up, we've got counter-arguments. At a glance, the idea that James could have used a love potion on Lily seems interesting, but unlikely. That is, until you really analyze the type of person James was. The entitlement, the arrogance, the suspicious gaps in time where he allegedly matured. When you lay it all out, it paints a picture of someone who was used to getting what he wanted and who didn't handle rejection well. However, there are some strong counterpoints worth considering. For one, despite James's flaws, multiple characters, including Lupin and Sirius, describe how he eventually outgrew his bullying ways and genuinely transformed. This wasn't just a superficial change, it was actually seen and acknowledged by his closest friends. Second, it's important to understand what love potions actually do. When someone falls under the influence of a love potion, their behavior most often becomes erratic, intense, and often dangerous. They become fixated on a single person to the point of losing all sense of self, ignoring reason, personal boundaries, and morality. It's not affection, it's magically induced obsession that strips away free will and creates a warped version of desire. One of the clearest examples is when Ron Weasley accidentally consumes a love potion meant for Harry from Romilda Vane. Therefore, the idea that James could have sustained a real relationship, marriage, and partnership with Lily under the influence of a potion, all while they fought Voldemort side by side, does feel a little unlikely. If James truly maintained a false marriage and fathered a child out of a union devoid of genuine love, then he's even worse than I ever thought. Not just a bully, but a manipulator who stole a life and a love that were never truly his. But if he didn't, then we're left with another hard-to-believe truth, that Lily chose him despite his past. She overlooked the arrogance, the cruelty, and the entitled behavior. All of it. And if that's the case, we're forced to confront just how much of James's so-called redemption happened off the page. What do you all think? Does this theory resonate with you, or does it all feel a little too spacey? Let me know down in the comment section below. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live